Wow. Wow, it really is the best salsa I've ever had in my life. Even the jalapenos are garden grown by this lady. Unbelievable. When it comes to salsa, there's two main rules as far as I'm concerned. It has to be the pico de gallo. You take all the stuff, you put it in a blender and puree it. That's cheating. That's not salsa. That's nothing. Got to be the pico de gallo with the tomatoes diced. Second thing, you can never, ever, ever have too much cilantro or garlic. It is impossible for that to happen, and she gets it. All right, here's what we're doing. Unless you have been under a rock while following this channel, you are well aware by now that one of my viewers, Dr. Ayman Kamar, out of Egypt, has written a book based on the material that we cover in this channel and also on my paid channel at Schrodinger's Box Quantum Mechanics. We are doing a book walkthrough over there among the hundreds of other videos we have with training and case studies and things like that. And in that book walkthrough, what you are about to see is just an excerpt from the basic electrical where we're covering parallel circuits. And the idea of this is just to show the style with these videos, how unlike here where you'll watch something and it's like, that is really cool, or that would be really cool to do. In Schrodinger's Box Quantum Mechanics videos, after watching a video, you walk away from that video knowing how to do what I am doing, whether it's parallel circuit understanding like what we're going to do here, whether it's looking at an electrical issue with a car's PCM. I walk through step by step showing you how to do what I'm doing, why you would do it, what to look for. It's a lot more detailed than what you get here on the main channel. If you enjoy it, you really want to check out the website over at www.schrodingersboxqm.com. $3.49 a month for unlimited access to all the videos. It's the best value if you are into automotive diagnostics and repair. If you want more Schrodinger's Box without having to pay for it, you also have the Autel content on the Autel AccuFix website. I will put a link to that as well. These are all 4-minute videos that is part of a project that I'm doing with Autel so that there is content on their scan tools so that technicians, if they get a code or something, they can look up, watch the video. The videos are only 4 minutes long and it allows them to quickly zero in using their scan tool to use the right parameters to try to diagnose a problem in real time in the field. It's almost as if Scotty Kilmer actually knew what he was doing and used a scan tool, this would be the format of those videos. So they're very enjoyable. For those of you guys that don't have access to those videos because of the country you're in, don't worry, I'm working on it. Finally, don't forget your Schrodinger's Box swag. Look, I actually look pretty good in this, I think. Really good high quality sweatshirts, t-shirts, things like that, coffee mugs. If you're into Schrodinger's Box, you can't live without having at least one piece of swag, even if it's a sticker. So check my merch shelf and you will find my listings for my swag that you can get. All right, my chips are getting soggy here, so I'm going to go ahead and let you enjoy this free sample of Schrodinger's Box Quantum Mechanics material. Enjoy. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed the little break with that EVAP system video, and we'll get back to now doing a few more pages in the book, and then we'll take another break so that we can kind of mix things up a little bit. And what we've got to do now, let's see where we're at. I know we've got some math coming up because we just did the voltage drop. Yes, here we are, parallel circuits, okay. And I understand the anxiety that something like this can cause, but here's the thing. First of all, I can tell you this one up here, this first problem, there's two examples here. This first example, we can actually do this without any math, believe it or not, because remember what I was saying earlier about visualizing the math? We're actually going to be able to do it on this first one. Now, this second one, probably not, but that's okay, because if we understand the first one, the second one will come easier. The second thing is yeah, it's really intimidating when you have this whole formula thing drawn out at once. And of course, you know, people always think of these professors or whatever with this chalkboard with this whole formula, and you look at that and you're like, wow. But you got to remember that this is happening step by step by step by step. So don't look at it all at once. Don't even pay attention to this part. We're going to go through it step by step, both visually and through the math. The other thing is, I will admit there's probably, I think only 2 or 3 times I've ever actually had to use electrical math in a diagnostic application on a car. And I can understand where people would see this as really not necessary. And I'm sure even in a tech school, people would learn this stuff and they would just blow it off and let's get to a wrench, you know. Even we might be like, oh, let's blow this off and let's get to a scope or a scan tool. I can understand that, but knowing this math, understanding this, first of all, helps you to understand electrical overall better. The other thing is not only understanding the electrical better, but there actually can be applications for this. More often I have them in my home. When I built the garage in the new house and I installed the lighting, for example, I absolutely used this because the lighting's parallel circuit. I absolutely use this in the garage so I can determine how many lights can I have without blowing the fuse, right? What's the maximum amperage in my garage and how am I getting to that point as I add more lights? And what is the effect of adding more lights on that? Sometimes you're thinking you add more lights, you're increasing resistance on the circuit. Well, as we see with a parallel circuit, it's the opposite. The more that you add, the less resistance you're adding and the more amperage through that circuit. So this math came in very useful at that time. Really encourage you to stick through this. The other thing is you'll be the only person in your zip code that can do this stuff too, especially if you're in a shop or something. Most people are just, if something comes down to this, your value is dramatically amplified, right? So what we're going to do is let's zoom in just on this first problem. And we also have to have a basic understanding of a major difference now with everything we've been doing up to now, which is a linear in-series circuit. With a parallel circuit, there's going to be a very big difference. So let's first of all make sure we understand that. Okay, so we're very familiar with our typical thing we've been doing all along where there's a load here. We even got a little advanced. We've got another load here. And then maybe we have a switch and we go off to our ground. And of course, we know, if you don't know by now, then boy, I don't know what to tell you. But if you don't know by now that in this circuit right here, we have 12 volts all through any point of this circuit because the switch is open. How many amps do we have through the circuit? There is 0 amps. There is no flow through this circuit because we aren't connected to the ground. If we connect to the ground here, now we have completed our circuit. We know now that there's going to be 12 volts up to here. We're going to have a voltage drop here. We're going to have a complete voltage drop for the rest of it here. So there will be 0 volts here. Depending on the resistance, we know that there will be whatever voltage here, but it's going to be 0 here, provided we have a clean ground. We also know the amperage through this circuit, no matter what the amperage is, it's the same at any point through this circuit. Any point through this circuit, sorry for wobbling the screen there. Any point through this circuit, we know the amperage will be exactly the same. Now in a parallel circuit, that is not going to be the case. So in the parallel circuit, you see we've got our 12 volts here, and then we split off. As we split off, we've got a load on this branch of the circuit and a load of this branch on the circuit. Forget about the numbers right now. We're not going to do any math in this first example, none. Then we come off and we get to our ground. We could as well just draw the ground symbol right here. Here's a little wire to the ground. Do keep in mind we're always assuming here that this ground has the capacity, so there's no limitation on the ground. If we're thinking of a river here, if we have this as a river, we're going to make a river here. We've got water flowing here, going this way. and our water's flowing, and then we come to our resistance here. So maybe a beaver built a dam or something here. So this beaver dam is here. Well, you can imagine now the water kind of gets blocked here, and it has to try to find its way around or through that dam. It's definitely going to be less. And then we know that the flow here, while we've got high pressure here, the pressure has dropped here. We know that whatever the rate of flow is here must be the same as here. So even though we've got all this water here, the actual movement of the water through the dam is the same as the movement after the dam. Here we've got another beaver dam here. And this will again restrict so that we have barely anything coming out. Now, of course, we have a little bit of backup here, so we're going to have a little bit of voltage in our electrical analogy. But afterwards, it just free flows into the river. And this ground here for the river is sort of unlimited, because otherwise we would have another third resistance with the ground being incapable. So this is kind of like going off into a lake when it goes off into the ground. So we don't have limitation there. And we can see we've got two obstructions here. Whatever the case is, ultimately, whatever is flowing out into the lake is the same flow we have here. This is I mentioned how 98% of the time the water analogy is going to get you by. It's going to work. We know in real life, in this situation here with a river, what would actually happen is the river would overflow its banks here. That doesn't happen in electricity. That's one of the reasons I like to use a hose as an analogy, because you're containing that in there. Rather than really build up pressure with a river, what would really happen is it would just overflow the banks. Well, of course, in a wire, you can't do that. So there are a little bit of differences here, but maybe a hose is a better analogy. I just think the river, I don't know, it's just easier for me to see water flowing through a river. I don't know. If we do this analogous to a parallel circuit, this is what's happening. All right, so for the parallel circuit, we've got kind of a resistance here. We've got a resistance here. And then this goes off to ground. Or in the example that Kmart has, we have a wire going off to the ground. Either way, same thing. We're not limited in any flow here. So here's the main thing. It's with the amperage difference. We know in this example and in our flow example here that the amperage, the current, is the same anywhere along this point. The voltages may be different, but the current is going to be the same, and hopefully we see that, we understand that. With a parallel circuit, the currents in each branch of the circuit can be different if the resistances are different. Now, in our math application here, these resistances are going to be the same, which makes it really easy. It gets a little more difficult when these are different resistances. The amount of flow here and here are going to be the same. So the amount of flow at your source up to any split and the amount of flow afterwards, those are going to be the same, okay? But you can have variance in the flow in each of these branches. This is a very important concept to understand. Let's visualize this by making the river analogy. All right, hopefully I can draw this, but in this river analogy, we're going to have the river here, and it's going to split off into two different directions. All right, now ultimately the rivers come back into a pool. So we've basically got like a big rock or an island or something here, and we can see this would be the ground over here. And we can see that as the water splits off in the island, if these are the same width and there's not a hill or anything, we can see that the water splits off equally here. So if we have, let's just say 1 amp of current, then we would have 0.5 amps here and 0.5 amps on the other side. Of course, when we add these back together, we're back to our 1 amp here. Now, the difference here is that what if we have an obstruction here? Okay, so let's say we've got our beaver dam here, and on this side now, we have a resistance, and on this side here, we have no resistance. All right, well, we can easily see that even though we have a resistance here, we're still going to get some flow through there, but not nearly as much as we get on this other branch. We're going to get a lot more water that's going to flow this way than this way. And that, of course, means we're going to have, in a parallel circuit, lower amperage here than we will here. This is going to be more than 0.5 amps for sure. This is going to be less than 0.5 amps now. But we're still at the end, provided we don't have some kind of other variable here where maybe there's if this is a hose and the hose is too thin and it can't carry this now, we could of course build up resistance then. But assuming no resistance here, we're going to still have 1 amp at the end. It's basically going to be more like 0.75 amps here, 0.25 amps here, whatever it would be. We're going to do math to figure that out later. But you can see how we have different amperages on each branch, whereas here we have the same amperage all throughout. So this is a very important concept to understand. All right, now given that, let's look at our example here. And we've got a lot of numbers going on here, but we're going to break this down. All right, so the same thing here. We've got our main river coming in here. It's splitting off, splitting off. Now, we have resistances given for us here. We have a 100 ohm resistor here, 100 ohm resistor here. So we have the same resistance on each branch. We also know that our total amperage in the circuit is 0.24 amps. Notice that Eamon put the 0.24 amps here at the beginning and at the end. It splits here. Now, without doing the math, let's think about that. If we have 0.24 amps total in the circuit and we split half of it this way and half of it this way, what is our amperage on each branch of the circuit? It's 0.12 amps. It's perfectly split because we have the same resistance. So there is no preference for the electricity to take one path or another. It splits equally. So without doing any math, we can just look at this. And if I said there is 1 amp in this circuit, how many amps are in this part of the circuit? It would be 0.5 amps. How many in this? 0.5 amps. What if it was the other way around? What if we didn't know the total amps in the circuit, but we knew this design and we only measured the amperage here? We only measured amperage right here and we measured 0.5 amps. What's the total amperage in the circuit? It's 1 amp. We don't need to do math on that. It's 1 amp because it's 0.5 amps here. This branch of the circuit is exactly the same, 0.5, 0.5, 1 amp. So we can visualize this without doing the math. If we want to do the math, no problem with that. We have a formula that we would use. Now, the first question, why is the formula here R1 times R2 over R1 plus R2 to get the total resistance? Why is that so complicated when all we had to do is apparently divide the total amperage by the number of parallel circuits? Well, the reason is because our example here is very easy. The resistances are the same. If the resistances aren't the same, then it changes things, and that's where the second screen comes in. All right, here the resistances are different. Now, here's the trick, okay? Because the numbers here are kind of easy, you can still do this in your head. You can still visualize this. But you still ultimately at some point are going to need to do the formula because the numbers aren't always going to be nice and easy to figure out like this. But let's take a look at this here. We're going to try to do this visually. In this example, we've got the same setup, except our resistance here is 100 ohms, Our resistance here is 25 ohms. Notice that the 25 ohms is 1/4 the resistance, 1/4 the resistance of the 100 ohm, okay? So let's just kind of note that. All right, our total amperage in this circuit is 0.6 amps. If it's 0.6 amps, we know that we're going to get some flow through here and a different flow through here, all right? Now, first of all, which one of these is going to have more flow? Which is going to have more flow? It's going to be the one with the 25 ohm resistance because there's less resistance. We know now, and we should be able to visualize with Ohm's law, that means there's going to be more flow. If you don't see it through Ohm's law, see it through the river analogy. There's a smaller beaver dam here, a bigger beaver dam here. More water is going to be able to go through here, right? Now, we've already got the math done for us here, but we will walk through the formula. If we notice here, though, we've got 0.12 amps here, 0.48 amps here. As I said, more amperage through this side of the circuit. But did you notice something about the relationship with the 0.12 and the 0.48? What is 0.12 times 4? It's 0.48. Because this is 1/4 of the resistance here, that means we're getting 4 times the amperage. Add these together, the 0.12 and the 0.48, we of course get our 0.6. But again, there is still a linear relationship here in that if we have 1/4 the resistance on a branch on this parallel circuit, we have 4 times the amperage. So it's still pretty easy to calculate in your head. All right, that said, let's go ahead and do the math. Let's do the math on the first one because we can easily visualize that math. Okay, let's get our magic formula here. The total resistance in the circuit is going to be the resistance on the first branch times the resistance on the second branch divided by the resistance on the first branch plus the resistance on the second branch. So as you can see, we cannot just add the two resistors together like we can in a series circuit. In a series circuit, no matter how many resistors you have in the straight line, in the series, to find the total resistance, you just add them together. You can't just add all the resistors that you see in a parallel circuit. All right, let's plug in some values here. We're still trying to figure out the total resistance. The resistance in the first branch of the circuit is 100 ohms. 100 times the resistance in the second branch, which is also 100 ohms. It is, in my opinion, way easier to just visualize this one. Divided by R1 plus R2, which would be 100 plus 100. This is still a pretty easy formula, though. All right, that means resistance total is going to be 110,000 over 200, and that's going to be 50, right? Yeah, actually, he's already got it calculated out, 50 ohms. So the total resistance on this circuit is 50 ohms. Okay, now, could we have figured this out in our head? Of course we can, because hopefully we can visualize this. And maybe you might have a little harder time visualizing this with the effect on resistance. Remember, we know earlier from our river analogy, the flow increased here. So we know if the flow increased using our analogy with the beaver dams, the resistance had to have been halved. And maybe you're having trouble seeing that because you're thinking, well, no, the beaver dam is still the same size. And I can understand where that is. You know the resistance is less because you were still also able to see that splitting the river up increased the flow through each branch versus having one beaver dam in the middle of one river. But a way to maybe help analogize this, to see why the resistance lowers, why the resistance doesn't stay the same here, is let's think of this like a bridge. All right, so let's imagine this. Let's imagine we've got a bridge, And we've got all these cars here, and these cars are lined up on the bridge. All right, and this is going to be a linear bridge here. And now we've got a resistance here. We have an accident on the bridge where two of these cars have collided. And now you can see where this creates a restriction as these cars are trying to get past the accident here. So of course, we're lowering our traffic flow. We're reducing the amperage. Okay, let's just assign a value to this of 100 ohms. I know that doesn't apply to a car, but this is just for practical purpose. We have now restricted this flow. Now, what's a way that we could improve on this? Well, let's look at this. Would you agree with me that if we split this bridge like this, and then we go and we merge into a superhighway ultimately, we have our same cars lined up here. All right, we have an accident here. First of all, you would certainly agree that just this design alone is going to be massively helpful. As the cars back up here, with our 100 ohm accident here, more cars are definitely going to be able to go through here where there is less traffic, right? So just this alone, we agree this parallel design is going to create a lot more flow. Now, what if we also are unfortunate enough to have an accident here as well? Let's look at the effect. All right, here we have another two cars that collided. That backs up traffic on this branch of our bridge as well. This collision here is also a resistance in our flow, and it's also 100 ohms. But think about it. We have a big difference versus here, whereas here only like one car at a time can go through here, only one car at a time. But in our parallel bridge here, two cars at a time can go through. One car each can go through. So it actually doubles the flow. The overall resistance is half. So can you see it now? Now does it make sense why this is? Does this also make sense now? This is where this is important. This is where this comes in. Can you see now that you are putting lighting in your garage? And as you're adding more and more and more lights, you used to be thinking, well, I'm adding more and more and more resistors, and I'm going to get dimmer lights because I'm creating this huge resistance. No, you're doing the exact opposite. What you're doing, every time you add a light, you're increasing amperage flow. You are decreasing the resistance every time. Do you see now why when you put too many circuits on there, you eventually blow a fuse? Because your amperage goes through the roof because you've dropped your resistance. So if nothing else, the visualization, you see how useful this can be. All right, let's now go and, let's see. We did our ohm here. On the second example, just to save time, we're going to go ahead and do the ohms and the amps calculation. All right, here's our second example. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through the math for both the ohms and the amps, and that's going to set up for what's coming next, where we're going to have a more complicated circuit. But because we understand the math, it's not going to be any harder. It actually isn't going to be any harder. So let's go ahead and do this one. All right, once again, our magic formula, the resistance total equals R1 times R2 over R1 plus R2. All right, we can easily calculate this out. That's going to be R1 is 100 ohms. I'm pulling that from right here. R2 is 25 ohms. 100 times 25. I don't like using X, honestly. I'm going to use a dot here. And I just don't like using the x because obviously being kind of an algebra guy, I see that as sort of a variable. To me, I look at this and I see R1 times x times R2. That's what I see. All right, so that's going to be over 100 plus 25. Okay, so we know that RT, therefore, is going to be 2,500 over 125. 2,500 divided by 125, I get 20. Where are we here? Yep, good, 20, all right. Okay, so the total resistance in this circuit is only 20 ohms. Notice it's less than the least resistance here because, again, we are able to create more current flow. We've reduced the effects of each individual resistor by splitting them up in the circuit. We've reduced the overall total resistance. Again, adding more devices into a parallel circuit will decrease your resistance. Kind of the opposite of maybe what you thought before. All right, now what we want to do is some amp calculations. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, let's see what he's doing here first of all. It looks like, okay, so it looks like IT, I'm going to assume that that's going to be the amperage total. Well, how easy is that? That's just Ohm's law. We can do that. V equals IR. We've got our voltage, 12 volts right there. 12 equals I we want to solve for, and R, I'm going to do this a different way. We're going to use a parentheses to show multiplication. The R we just calculated as 20 ohms. Divide by 20, divide by 20. 12 divided by 20 equals, I get 0.6. I know I saw that. 0.6 amps. That crosses out. I equals 0.6 amps. That's the total amperage through the circuit. That means it's 0.6 amps here, it's going to be 0.6 amps here, and it's going to be a combination to equal 0.6 amps here. So let's just go ahead and do one of those. All right, let's clear off a little bit of room here. Okay, which one do you want to figure out? Let's go ahead and just figure out the amperage on this one. V equals IR, 12 equals I times the resistance, which is 25. I equals 12 divided by 25. I equals 12 divided by 25 equals 0.48 right there. 0.48 amps. The amperage right there is 0.48 amps. We could do that same calculation and find that it's going to be 0.12 amps, or we can just use our common sense and know it has to be 0.12 because the total is 0.6. There's no resistance here, no resistance on the ground. So therefore, the only other change in amperage would be in this leg of the circuit. It's going to be 0.12. We don't even need to know what the ohms are, as a matter of fact. So that is on our parallel circuit with two branches. We got one more thing left to do for this video. We need to step it up to this. All right, of course, we knew this was coming. We're just adding more branches to our circuit to complicate it. But you'll notice also now when you have more than two branches, you have a new formula here, which is actually a pretty easy formula to remember. I think it's easier than the other one. And also Eamon made it a little more challenging in that he made different little resistances each time here. Thank you for that. He also introduced another thing, which is true, and that is you still get a complete voltage drop after each individual resistance within each branch of the circuit. That is a good point. I don't think I mentioned that before, but of course you will have full voltage drop across every resistance within each branch. Good job, Eamon. I didn't think of that, but of course that should make sense to us. All right, so now we've got a new formula here. Let's go ahead and attack this. All right, so we're thinking if we can find the total resistance in this circuit, that would be very helpful for us. So let's start off with that. All right, the formula is 1 over the total resistance equals 1 over the first resistance plus 1 over the second resistance plus 1 over the third resistance. And you can see we can add on as many parallel circuits as we want here with this formula. We're just going to do the 3. All right, let's plug in some numbers. 1 over the total resistance equals 1 over R1 is 100, R2 is 20, R3 is 50. 1 over 100 plus 1 over R2, which is 20, plus 1 over R3, which is 50. Okay, that means 1 over RT equals 1 over 100, which is going to be, what is that, 0.01, right? Plus 1 over 20, which that's going to be 5 times more than 1 over 100, so that should be 0.05. I am getting a little exhausted here. I'm going to just double check that. 1 divided by 20 equals, yes, I still got it, 0.05. Okay, plus 1 over 50. 1 divided by 50 equals 0.02. That means 1 over RT equals 0.01 plus 0.05 plus 0.02, which is going to be 0.08. All right, we need that RT by itself. That means RT is going to be equal to 1 divided by 0.08, which is going to be equal to 1 divided by 0.08 equals, I get 12.5 ohms. 12.5 ohms. Okay, so the total resistance on this circuit is only 12.5 ohms. Again, visualize that relationship here. The least resistance we have in here is 20 ohms, and we can see that by splitting up 3 ways here. Even with higher resistances, overall, we've reduced the total resistance on the circuit. I do think it would be very useful in a practical application to see what's the total amperage in the circuit, because that, again, gets to that analogy with a real-life application of adding lights to a room or something like that. What's the total amperage that you're going to have based on your design? So let's go ahead and calculate that. All right, so we're going to do total amperage in this circuit. Let's bring in our circuit here so that you can see what we're doing. What we're going to do is V equals IR. All right, we know the voltage is 12 equals I. The total resistance in the circuit we just calculated as 12.5. If we divide by 12.5, divide by 12.5, that cancels out. I equals 12 divided by 12.5 equals, I get 0.96 amps. 0.96 amps, yes. All right, that means the total amperage through this circuit here is 0.96 amps. That means we've got 0.96 amps here. We will have 0.96 amps here. We will also have 0.96 amps here divided out by each of these circuits. Let's, of course, let's go ahead. If we can calculate one, we can do all of them. Let's just calculate out for one of these. Let's do the 100 ohm one. Okay, so we're going to calculate for just that guy. So we know that, well, actually, you know what? You don't even need to have the total amperage to do this. We can just do V equals IR and calculate this as it is. V equals IR. Okay, that means 12 equals I times 100 ohms. That means I equals 12 divided by 100, which equals 12 divided by 100 equals, I get 0.12 amps. Where here is that 0.12? Yes, divided by the 100 ohm, 0.12 amps. Okay, that is it. Let's see if we've got anything else. Oh, look, we are finally through it. we survived it, and it wasn't really that bad. It wasn't really, like, that's the most math in the whole book. And it wasn't that bad. So it looks like after this, we're going to get to the DVOM. So the next video, we will cover some DVOM stuff again. Let's just see if we got anything else here. All right, we'll see you on the next video.